Thanks after a long break. Thanks for staying with us. We were doing some video switching around the wonders of modern technology. We're going to get a little bit away from that. We're going to talk about the old South End in Stamford, Connecticut. Perhaps when things were better. My good friend Ron Mark, it's a pleasure. Resident historian at the Stamford Historical Society, and we're going to talk about the history of the South End. We've chatted with some development plans that are very ambitious right now as far as what the future will be, but yet this is an organization, this is a part of town with just a terrific past and maybe a not so great recent past, and now we move out into the future. But as you always tell me, you can't appreciate the future and the present without going back to see how things actually happen. So you've prepared some wonderful pictures and slides for us and some graphics, and you know, take us whatever way you want to go here.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's the old replay on my favorite statement. What's past is prologue from Shakespeare, and The Tempest.
We have I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, we have a slide here, and I guess this would be Woodland Cemetery.
This is Woodland Cemetery.
Way back when.
Okay. We're starting in, the photograph doesn't go back that far, but we're starting in 1861. 1861, the burial grounds in Stamford were getting full. There was a whole movement in the United States, well established by the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to have a cemetery association with rules, with regulations, with surveys, with records kept in a reasonably fireproof situation, and so on and so on and so forth. And this spread throughout the whole United States. I mean, Evergreen, New York, all these famous cemeteries were all modeled after Mount Auburn. And we're certain that Woodland Cemetery in the South End was modeled after that, with landscape grounds and everything else that I said.
So this is the cemetery of the future, way back when? Way back in
1861, yeah. Okay. It started. It was and still is basically the Protestant cemetery of Stamford. The Catholic cemetery was established about 10 years later in the Springdale section of Stamford.
Right, and that would be St. John's.
St. John's.
St. John's, right.
So this is the entrance to Woodland Cemetery, and it looks you know, very countrified, very countrified, and it still has that countrified sort of look to it. That it's beautifully kept, and it's still an ongoing cemetery in use.
Now, how big is the cemetery plot of land in rough terms? I mean, I'm just sitting here, and again,
I'm sorry.
You deal with my pea brain, and I'm thinking 1868, and now we're at 2013, and there's a lot of people that have passed on along the way. And somehow I don't think as the South End of Stamford of just having like rolling hills going on and room forever and ever and ever.
True. The cemetery has expanded over the years from 1861. They added additional acreage, and particularly in the past 30 years, they added a significant amount of land to it. So there is still room, still interments going on there. In fact, there was one going on when Dan Burke and I were walking around taking images and so on.
It's, yeah, and it really, now when would you estimate this particular picture was taken?
I would say early in the 20th century, possibly sometime before World War I.
And it looks like right about the time of year we're in, with all the leaves off the trees and just a very sad.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll move to our next, and I'm learning new graphics here as I go. We'll move to our next piece, which is our slide number 2, which is, this will be up in a moment. This is 1868, you're telling me.
Yeah, 1868 was a very, very, very significant year in the history of Stamford. Many, many things happened of great significance. The the water company was founded in 1868. The New Canaan, the railroad to New Canaan was opened in 1868. The Reverend Huntington published his definitive History of Stamford, 350-page work in 1868, which is still in use and been reprinted many times in 1868. And also in 1868, a realtor, developer, entrepreneur named George A. Hoyt opened up buildings lots for sale in Stamford, Connecticut. This is just a little inset of a map that's on record in the Stamford Town Clerk's office of this. The plan was at the time, and he owned most of the South End, exclusive of this is just a small segment of it. He owned most of the South End, other than, of course, Woodland Cemetery. And he opened it up in 1868 for development. And you can get a better idea of it if you move to the next image.
Okay, so we'll, and I'm fascinated with the hand inscriptions that are
yes,
here.
Yes, this is from the beautiful records in our town clerk's office.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, I think of the town clerk and I think of our long-standing, yeah, of course, you know, like being in Stamford is sort of like being a member of the Yankees. You always say we are, you know, you get possessive about it. Mrs. Pot Brion,
yes,
the town clerk, who would stand in the center of that floor. Anything you needed, she had an encyclopedic memory. She'd just be able to pivot her finger and say, over there. And it would be there.
Exactly, and because she was
she was fantastic.
Yeah, and our current town clerk, Mrs. Leglisi, Donna Leglisi, equally runs a very good office with extraordinary, very helpful staff.
And to all you guys out there wondering what we're thinking about, you had to be there. Please continue.
Yes. Yeah, and Lois Pumprion is still, thank God, still alive. Still
fantastic.
Just a phenomenal lady. This gives you an idea of just a good portion of it. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see Woodland Cemetery. But all around are building lots that George A. Hoyt put up for sale in 1868. Obviously, the plan was to have it all residential. 1868, I know I sound so repetitive, because another significant item happened in 1868. Along came two gentlemen who were looking for a place to establish a factory, Linus Yale Jr. and Henry R. Town. And they chose Stamford. And they approached George A. Hoyt to buy up several large segments of these, and instead of residential, they established their factory here. And this, of course, was the beginning, 1868, Yale and Town Incorporated, and they were the dominant economic factor in Stamford for close to a century, in the South End.
And as I look, I see the familiar names of the streets. There's Walnut, there's Ludlow, there's Henry, there is Atlantic, there's Market, and those are the same streets today.
Right.
So we'll close that up, and I guess we'll be coming up on a hard break in approximately 2 minutes. Thank you, Mark. And we'll move along to slide number 4. And this is the, we're back to a map again. And this is, apparently this is the streets that would contain the Yale and Town
right. Complex.
Right.
If we can move on to the next piece.
Next one.
I'd like to know what made Yale and Town so successful was Linus Yale Jr.'s remarkable invention of, this is a cutaway view of a later, but it was still the basic invention that he had the sole U.S. patent on, the pin tumbler lock. Prior to that, most locks were large, with the typical large jailer's type of key. There were very modifications on it to try to make them pick-proof. But Linus Yale Jr., who was in the bank lock business himself, bank locks are the locks that are in the vault doors themselves, as his father started. But he came up with this revolutionary concept of having a small, flat, thin key with grooves, run by pins that would make it virtually pick-proof, and a small flat key. He was thinking primarily for bank locks. He needed capital. There was Henry R. Town of Philadelphia, who was the son of a gentleman who built ironclads for the American Civil War for the Union. He did well. His side won, so he had lots of capital. And his son had lots of capital. Linus Yale Jr. needed capital. So they formed a partnership, and they chose Stamford as their headquarters for their factory. And this was to be imagined. Having the sole U.S. patent on something like that, it'd be like having almost the sole patent on a cell phone today.
It's amazing when you think of the whole thing of how that just revolutionized the culture.
Absolutely.
That anybody living in any sort of, we all live in limited dwellings, but at least you had the security of just locking your house and saying,
right,
this is as secure can be. We're coming up on a hard break at 11 o'clock. We'll be back very, very shortly with Ron, and we have a ton more slides and discussions to get into. And thanks for being with us. The best is yet to come, and it'll keep getting better. Tony D'Angelo, Ron Marcus here in Connecticut Morning. At the top of our 11 o'clock hour, we'll see you right after this.
Hello, Earth. I'm Alec Baldwin, TV star. You know, they say TV will rot your brain. That's absurd. TV only softens the brain, like a ripe banana. To take it all the way, we've created Hulu. Hulu beams TV directly to your portable computing devices, giving you more of the cerebral gelatinizing shows you want, anytime, anywhere, for free.
I only act out because I want your love. Dynamite!
Mushy mush. And the best part is there's nothing you can do to stop it. I mean, what are you going to do, turn off your TV and your computer? Once your brains are reduced to a cottage cheese like mush, we'll scoop them out with a melon bowler and gobble them right on up. Oops. I think I'm drooling a little. Because we're aliens. And that's how we roll. Hulu, an evil plot to destroy the world. Enjoy.
David Bowie singing about changes, and oh man, the south end of Stamford is going to be seeing more changes, but it's been changes since 1868. Back with our friend Ron Marcus here. Bob Fiore, who's being his usual unruly self, asked what I thought was a very good question. Yale in town. How did the name come about?
Well, there was a Mr. Yale, Linus Yale Jr., who invented the pin tumbler lock, and a Mr. Town, Henry R. Town of Philadelphia, who was an engineer, and they formed this partnership. They chose Stamford, Connecticut. We're not 100% sure why, but it's reasonable to figure out why. Good water and rail transportation within immediate proximity to it, and very close proximity to New York City by rail.
Now, you had pointed out to me, and this is something I think which bears discussion. In our slide here, we show the Yale key sliding into something with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tumblers. And that's, I mean, at the time this came out, this must have been like, we get all gaga these days about the iPhone. This must have been like...
It was. As a matter of fact, as to show the success of it, they were constantly involved in litigation over patent rights to it, because every hardware company around tried to imitate it, tried to say, no, this is a new idea on it, and they were constantly in the courts for years. Once the patents expired, every hardware company in the world copied it exactly, and still uses it to this day.
Now that's interesting, because in this culture we live in now, I walk into my kitchen, which is a humble sight to behold. I see a KitchenAid dishwasher, I see a Frigidaire refrigerator, I see a Sunbeam blender, and those things are as much those particular objects that they were years back as I happen to be Dick Cavett. They're branded. That all said, is the Yale lock a branded brand anywhere, or the Yale key? Can I still get a key somewhere in this world saying Yale? Understanding?
Yes, you still can. You still can. But the idea, the actual mechanism has been copied everywhere.
Understand.
Because the patents expired.
Right.
And once the patent's expired, it was open to anyone.
And when did the patent expire?
I'm not sure, because again, there was so much. It was nonstop litigation almost from day one, because it was just as with any advancement, technological advancement, people want to get in on something successful.
And they'll keep trying.
They'll keep trying.
So we'll move along. It's quite an interesting thing.
So
And, you know, it's,
they established this factory in the South End, very small at first, but it just grew and grew and grew.
Okay.
To eventually become this massive. This is a view of it.
This is slide 6. Yeah. Now this is. Now tell me the streets here that are bordering, and is that Market Street?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's Market, and that's Henry.
That would be Henry. So that is, I mean, to people in my generation. Oh, that's the King's property. That's
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. And you can see Long Island Sound in the distance. I mean, it was massive. They actually had, and the next illustration will show it.
And we'll move along.
They had actual rail connection right into the works, right from the main line of the railroad. They brought in raw materials into the works. This is a
diagram.
A fire insurance illustration of it. You can see the tracks. You can see the different departments. They can move raw materials in. They can move materials within the complex by rail. Move final products out. It was very, very, very well thought out. It grew over the years. They also eventually developed their own. They just consumed so much power that eventually it was all the machinery was driven by steam engines, and they built their own electric plant for electricity and converting it all to electric-driven machinery in about 1901. So it was just extraordinary. They had many specialty products too. Let's say you were a gentleman of great wealth and you wanted your coat of arms on every doorknob in the house for with a specialty, a certain type of bronze. They would do this. They would do this sort of work. They also did ornamental hardware on public buildings, courthouses. The Jefferson building of the Library of Congress, the oldest building, they did the ornamental hardware for the Jefferson building of the Library of Congress. Just the most exquisite ornamental hardware.
Now, the Yale in Town plant, and I realize, at least in our sequence of slides, we'll be leaving this for a moment, and this has always been a curiosity for me.
Sure.
When did the plant actually cease operations in this particular location, and what were they making at the time? Was it post-war, after the defense boom? Was it sometime after that? Were they still doing some locks in the 60s?
We're going to end with this, but briefly, they were producing locks right up to the end. Locks and what they call builders hardware, hinges, all sorts of respective type of bronze and ornamental hardware. They were producing right up to the end. They did also a lot of specialty products too. Post office boxes, for instance, that you see in the post office.
And what's the approximate year of the end, would you say?
The early 1950s.
Okay.
The early to mid 1950s. It went out slowly, division by division, section by section, to different other plants throughout the United States. And there was a reason for that, and I will get to that at the end. But this was really, I mean, most people had either one relative most people in Stamford had at least one or more relatives who worked in the Allentown Manufacturing Company.
Well, you know, and I think I've told
Huge.
you, I have these, and I have to get a cufflink shirt at some point, because I've never really, you know, cufflinks are nice, but typically I go to buttons because you're fumbling around in the morning. It's like, okay, where's the cufflinks? I have a pair of these Yale lock cufflinks. I don't know how I came about them. Marianne Robinson, my assistant, you know, I would wear them when we were both at the bank. Yeah, similar. Well, you've got the tie clip. Yeah, we'll hold that up, and our viewers have become familiar with that. And I don't know how I came about them, but yet they're beautiful, and I think they might have been like a service award or something.
No, they were salesmen's.
You mentioned that to me.
Items. Your people in sales would go around and to hardware stores and architects, suppliers, jobbers, various other people in the hardware industry, and just distribute them
and hand them out.
Sure.
So we'll move along here, and
So
I guess
this was the beginning of the South End becoming a center for industry. You had residential as well. You had a combination of residential and industry. You had, I didn't want to get into the housing, that's a whole other sphere about the types of housing. You had everything from little, small, artisan mechanic type of housing to mansions. Henry R. Town himself built a huge, elegant mansion in the city.
I would imagine probably going down towards the water. That would be my...
No, on the contrary, it was more, it was a little bit more inland, but he wanted it obviously as a showplace that it was, that he could walk to the works, and this was common in the 19th century.
And
on that. In the shadow of Yale and Town,
we have our next slide, Excelsior.
Was a small little hardware company called Excelsior, and established by the Mix family. And the Mixes always like to say that they lived and worked in the shadow, and their company was in the shadow of Yale and Town. That Yale and Town was Goliath, and they were David. They were little David, and Yale and Town was Goliath. Excelsior specialized. They made only one or two types of lines of hardware that Yale and Town didn't make, and that is they made hardware for luggage. They made trunk locks.
Ah, neat.
And other types of trunk and luggage hardware that Yale and Town didn't make. So they coexisted very well within very close proximity to one another, and again were a source of employment. They were a specialty lock and hardware company.
Now, what part of the South End was Excelsior? I mean, I always heard the name. I work at Excelsior Hardware. That was a familiar thing. I knew people that worked there, or knew someone that did work there, going into the 1970s.
Right. Right.
Where exactly was it?
It was on. Not Market. I can't think of the next street over. It was.
Heading towards the water.
Heading towards the water. It was again. It was literally within the shadow of.
Understand. Well,
Yale and Town, and yet so close, and yet completely different. And again, you had, the area became a magnet for people to live because there was work. This, of course, was at the time of the vast migration, large waves of immigrants coming to the United States from Europe, and you had what brings a people to a community? Two things. Either they have relatives here or work.
Or work,
or
yeah.
both. And in this case, there certainly was work, lots of work. Everything from tool makers, die makers, pattern makers, machinists, all sorts of very highly skilled work, molders and founders.
And that sort of coincided with that later wave of immigration, which was the Italian, the Slovak, the Polish, and and that's for certain. We'll move to the next slide here, which I guess, yeah, I finally figured out how this works. Fantastic. These are some Excelsior products.
Right.
Guess.
These are trunk
The
locks.
trunk lock.
These are trunk locks. You would see them on your if anybody out there has an old, large foot locker type of trunk, and it's of a quality trunk, chances are there's probably an Excelsior lock on it. Yale and Town made some as well, but they really didn't. They just did it. Excelsior had, quite frankly, a larger, more of a variety in it, and for some reason, Yale and Town didn't decide to press it. They carried a line of luggage locks, but Excelsior was able to make many different various types and different types of quality, which Yale and Town didn't seem to bother. Yale and Town was more concerned with locks and hardware for buildings, as well as other specialty things, such as they had a whole division also that made prison locks too as well.
Now that was going to be my next
As
question.
well.
Excelsior Hardware and
strictly-
Yale and Town, were they involved in defense production during the Second World War?
Yes. During the Second World War, I don't know percentage-wise, but the majority of industries throughout the United States, and the South End, certainly Stamford is no exception, were involved in defense work. Unquestionably, they would work on things that were totally unrelated to what they
Had set out
to be,
Sure.
unless it was something that was needed for the war effort, such as there was an industry in Stamford, not in the South End, called in the Springdale section called the Immaculate Laboratories, and they made X-ray tubes.
Right.
And because of the nature of it, it was vital that they keep on producing X-ray tubes. Whereas the Yale and Town Manufacturing Company, I do know, made bronze, since they were had artisan mechanics and machinists and tool and die makers, all sorts of skilled people who knew how to work bronze. Both Yale and Town and Excelsior, and I'm sure Pitney Bowes and the others
Followed suit, sure.
suit. Yale and Town, I do know, made the nose pieces with the timing devices for bombs and large artillery shells, amongst other things.
Now, somebody watching this,
In World War I and World War II.
that's amazing. Now, someone watching this and looking at this through today's lenses, and I don't mean to poo-poo this nor demean it, because we have done incredible damage, to the environment that we live in, might be looking at this and saying, this is terrible. I'm not saying this is me. This is 100 and some odd years of industrial production. What's in the ground? What's in the water? What's this? What's that? Was any of this ever at issue? Is it at issue today? Is that a later part of our discussion? Because I know the question will come up as saying, well, you're talking making bombs for 2 wars. I don't think we're going to find maple syrup in the ground.
No, they didn't make the bombs. They made the bronze nose pieces.
The bronze nose pieces.
Right. But you're talking about brownfields and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That whole question really didn't arise until well after World War II, until well after the period that I wish to discuss today. If we were to go into that could be a whole
we'll
other
hold
topic.
that for a later topic, which is absolutely fine. So we're moving along here, and this is our slide number. We've done, this is another Excelsior. Okay, no, we've done that. I'm sorry. And we're going to go to slide number 10, which is I'm going to see if I can pronounce this right. Blickensdorfer Manufacturing Company.
Very good.
It's 644 Atlantic. Now I'm going to make a guess here, and I'm going to say this is sort of south of the train trestle.
Yes.
Okay.
It's in the South End. Was in the South End. Is no longer there. Again, there was such a variety of industry. Once the Yale and Town started, many followed suit, because they knew that the labor market was
in Stamford.
Right.
Right.
That had the skills to produce the products that they were going to make. And Blickensdorfer Manufacturing Company was one of them. There were two brothers by the name of Blickensdorfer, and they invented a typewriter. And you can move on to the next one, and it'll actually show one of their
Sure.
machines.
Okay. So
They made this typewriter, and it was kind of revolutionary at the time. It had a It had a little drum in the upper center of it, that if you depressed the key, the drum would made of Bakelite plastic. It would twirl around, go over an ink roller, and strike the against the paper in the roller. And they were all interchangeable, very similar to the IBM ball from the IBM Selectric machine. The other thing that Blickensderfer did was, it was very revolutionary. They made the body of their typewriters out of die-cast aluminum. And
that was space age back then. I'd have to imagine.
Absolutely, because most I'm 73, and I can remember your older typewriters were quite heavy. They were very heavy. And some of the earlier ones, the frames were made of cast iron. This one was made of, they made some of cast iron, but they made also some of them of aluminum. And in so doing, they made the first practical portable typewriter, because it was so light. They advertised it as the 5-pound secretary.
What's interesting to me is that I'm looking at that keyboard, and I'm looking at the keyboard here on the computer, and there's no similarity to any person living or dead.
That's right. That's right. Your standardized or your QWERTY keyboard didn't come about at first. Every typewriter company had their own way of producing a keyboard. Your standard keyboards, I'm not sure when they came about. I think, ballpark estimate, and I'm not an authority on typewriters except Blickensderfer, and I'm not even an authority on that really, but I would say probably the early 1920s, or maybe even the late teens. But there was this company producing in the 19th century these typewriters out of aluminum. Not at first, but by early 20th century, they were producing these out of aluminum, and of course, you could take them literally everywhere. You could literally have them on your lap, typing away. But it's curious, though, that we've made the transition from typewriters to laptops and tablets and so forth, all using the QWERTY keyboard.
Right.
But before that, every company had their own keyboard.
Now, do any of these pieces, the Blickensderfer typewriters, survive in any museums?
Oh yes, we have a number of them at the Stamford Historical Society.
Isn't that neat? That's worth, the trip.
We have not on display right now because the building currently is undergoing renovation. So please, everyone out there, please bear with us while we're under construction.
And go, because that is...
Well, our library is open, and we still maintain that until the construction is over, and probably, hopefully, by the end of this year or early spring.
Well, get out when the weather's good.
But
fantastic.
we do have them. There are many, many, many museums. Smithsonian has them. They even went so far as to produce an electric typewriter. They actually made an electric. There are only 2 of them known in the world right now that so far have survived. For a very short time, and then World War I broke out, and they converted to defense work, and their European markets dried up, and so they didn't last. So
when were they effectively out of the typewriter business?
Oh, the early 1920s, because they were never able to reestablish their foreign markets, because they were really they had tremendous. Well, Yale and Town certainly had a tremendous foreign market, and so did Blickensderfer, because the thing about because it had an interchangeable type wheel, you could include characters and punctuation marks from different languages onto this type wheel, even a type wheel with musical symbols on it and so on. So you could, it was just a revolutionary concept, produced here in Stamford, here. We're in New Haven today, but sorry, I carry Stamford around wherever I go.
Yeah, don't we? And you know, and some of our younger audience looks at this, hey man, wow, a printing keyboard, isn't that something? So,
Well,
we're coming up on a hard break here, and much more to go, and we, you know, we'll get through it. I mean, it's just that there's so many things that just lead themselves to so many other discussions. But with that, we'll be jumping out for a break, and we'll be back very soon. Tony D'Angelo and Ron Marcus here in Connecticut Morning. Come back for more of the past being prologue leading to the future in Stamford, Connecticut. Right back after this.
Didn't know, couldn't see what was around the corner for me.
Let's go! Check me out, my legs are moving. Dance real smooth, gotta keep it moving. Take it fast, take it slow, sing it all day, come on, let's go. Can't get enough of these crazy moves. Slide on by, now that's real smooth. Throw your hands up in the air, bounce on violent down your hair.
Starting my fire,
Now that's real nice.
fill me
Come
up,
on, get loose.
you take me high.
Let's go!
Back again on Connecticut Morning. We have such a lively group here when you kind of get four old Stamford guys talking, and you can kind of include our producer in that. But I've got to tell you this story, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything that we're discussing today, just about perhaps everything. A good friend of mine growing up was a lovely Greek man named Peter Karoukas. He lived up near the hospital.
sure.
God bless Pete. Pete was, I mean, watching TV with Pete was something today that they'd probably be sending out protests on. It was just, he was incredible, just some of the commentary and things. But from what I understood, there was a number of factory workers who were Greek and Irish and whatever, and they were great fans of the Yale football team, the Yale University football team up the road. Why? Because they worked at Yale in town. Now, there's a connection here, from what we understood, was that they thought it was the shop team. And for real, and they're driving up on the post road, 5 hours, no highway, whatever the case may be, and they thought that Harvard and Princeton and whatever the case may be, they thought they were other factories, you know. And one day somebody told them, no, this is not the shop team. This is a university. See over there, there's spires and everything. And these guys were so downhearted, they thought. But Pete, loyal man that he was, to his grave, he said, I'm a Connecticut man, I'm a Yale man, I support Yale. Wow. You heard it here. God bless Pete. He was something. Anyway, we're moving along to, this is the Getman and Judd factory.
yes. At first, it was the St. John's Woodworking Company. Then it became St. John, Getman and Judd, and then eventually became Getman and Judd. Now, this is an earlier. This view is before the 1890s, because in the 1890s, the rail traffic became so heavy in this from New York to Boston that certain sections they widened it and they four-tracked it and they changed the rails a bit. In this illustration, you see the rails going right down to the canal. Well, that has all been changed now. There's a street that runs by the canal today, so it's different. You don't have the tracks there. You still have the rail yard will be to the right of this illustration. Yes, very much so. Very much so. Very active rail yard. But this company was a very, very large firm. They had their own, they would bring in by canal and by rail all sorts of exotic woods, cherry and mahogany and very, very, very beautiful rosewoods for some of the elaborate mansions that were going up during this time were built by the various owners of these manufacturing companies, as well as the homes for the workers, as well as homes for people from associated industries. And they also worked with Yale and Town. Yale and Town had a post office box division. They made not only the bronze post office boxes that you see, in every post office, there's these post office boxes, But they would even, if you wanted, if the postmaster wanted, do the woodwork for them, and the woodwork was subcontracted through the St. John Gitman and Judd, or the Gitman and Judd Company. Very, very large company in the South End.
And you're going to correct me, but I'm going to do a memory test here. I remember seeing a Gitman and Judd sign, I'm going to say 1950s, 1960s, on, I guess, what is now the Post Road, over near where the Schaefer Moving is, on the west side, over probably what would be now the Yearwood Center.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I remember a sign saying the Gitman and Judd Company.
Well, they eventually had yards everywhere.
I see.
They just spread out everywhere to not everywhere, but numerous other facilities within Stamford, within Fairfield County, actually. A very, very large concern. And again, it wasn't just bringing in lumber by rail, and ship, but they actually had specialty cabinet makers and woodworkers within there, where they would actually turn and produce all sorts of fine woodwork, sashes, whatever was needed for, because the clientele was here because of the industry in Stamford.
Sure.
You had people of various economic means, and they built their homes according to their means, and to those on the top, the sky was the limit, and they would supply that.
Now, it's, we'll move along to, and I'm going to see if I could pronounce this as well, and it's amazing. I always prove my ignorance of Stamford when I come here, thinking I may know so much. Schleicher and Sons?
Very good, close, but the Schleicher.
Schleicher. Piano manufacturer.
Correct. And they, the Schleicher Piano Company was, again, one of the many specialty companies that were produced in the South End, producing things. Pianos were very popular in American homes from
this was
post-Civil
home
War,
entertainment. I mean,
post-Civil War era, straight on through to up to World War II, for close to a century. To have a piano was considered a must, if one could afford it. And
well, especially if you had girls, I think, because if the girls couldn't play the piano, you were considered to be like, you're not educating them.
It was part of the education, the social graces, if you will, of people to have them. They were very popular. There were many firms in the United States, and Schleicher was one of them. They were not as renowned for. They made primarily upright.
Next slide, number 14.
Upright pianos. I don't know if they ever made a grand. This is one at the Historical Society, actually.
And how many of these things? There's a number of them surviving to this day.
I'm sure we don't. The Historical Society, we don't have a census of the number of Schleicher pianos in the United States, but every now and then we'll get an inquiry from a museum or from a piano dealer. Do you have any information on this piano? It's in my shop, or it's in my it's in our museum, and we will help them out with information on them.
Now it's interesting. I can't tell you what last night's dinner was, but I can tell you that when I was in the Stamford school system, 50 years ago, the pianos were mostly of a lighter shade, and I think they were Baldwins, if I remember. And I don't know if there probably was no local connection, but I do remember they did have somewhat of that appearance.
Well, Baldwins were was it a grand, or was it a...
It was very similar to the one we're seeing. An upright.
Yeah. Uprights were more affordable than grands.
Mm-hmm.
Grands are
something you put in the
larger.
classroom.
Yeah, well, your uprights are also take up less space than a grand.
And back then, teachers were expected to know how to play the piano and lead the children in song.
Yes, that was the part of the requirement for many teachers.
So we'll move along here to our next slide.
And again, different specialty, different requirements for pianos than locks. Certain basic things. This is the Schleicher's, an example of their stock.
That's the way they used to look with the certificates, with
Right.
the gold seal and
Right.
the raised lettering, and
Right.
they were really works of art.
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, there are collectors of
Yes.
stock certificates because they were done by many famous engraving companies, especially American Banknote Company and others produced stock certificates, and a lot of people collect these, particularly if it's a railroad and it shows a view of the railroad on it, and, or a firearms company with firearms on it. And, I mean, there's an infinite variety of stock certificates. And this is of this piano company, and this is how they raise capital for them. And of course, your piano manufacturing is there are similarities in certain basic things, but then again, you have your specialty types of people building them. They used to use ivory, of course, in those days, and you had to have people who knew how to work ivory to make the keys. They would obviously get the piano plates, which is the large frame that holds the strings that is put on from other people. I don't think they ever cast their own piano plates. That's a very highly specialized field itself. But to assemble an instrument such as a piano requires some very highly skilled individuals.
No doubt. You know, it's as I
It is an
studied this
instrument.
stock certificate just for a moment, you know, and we'd read the examples in school. I still see them where they talk about shares outstanding on the books of the corporation, and you think, how arcane, how outdated, what are they? Nobody uses books anymore, but you see where that comes from. This was actually in a book of certificates, and there was probably a hand registry. You know, in this case, it would be Walton Ferguson, the proud owner of 47 shares. It's really highly interesting. What became of the piano company?
We don't know. No one to date has done a study of the Schleicher Piano Company. There have been many studies of other companies, such as especially the Yale and Town Manufacturing Company, but and other firms in Stamford, Bose and others. I'm talking about just South End companies now. But of this particular firm, we don't know yet.
Very interesting. We'll move along to, and we're talking now about the Schickel, if I have that right?
Yes.
Schickel motorcycles.
You're doing good on your Germanic pronunciations today. Let's see, we have...
Good night, Charlie Mazer, wherever you are.
We have
God bless you,
Blickensderfer, we
too.
have Schleicher, and now we have Schickel. Okay? Yes. This is quite fascinating how things turn up. For years we heard of the Schickel Manufacturing Company. We knew they made motorcycles. We knew they were in the South End. But aside from a few ads for them in magazines, city directories, newspaper, and so forth, we knew very little about the
nature
firm.
and yeah.
Well, we knew what their products were, but we had no images of them whatsoever until about 5 years ago. No, sorry, close to 6 or 7 years ago now. A descendant of the Schickel family produced a book of a history of the Schickel Motorcycle Company. Contacted us. We learned all about Mr. Norbert Schickel, who taught engineering at Cornell University, who decided to leave Cornell and form his own company producing motorcycles, located here in Stamford, Connecticut. Again, the labor pool. He knew he could find the skilled people to produce his product. And he started this firm, and the family produced this wonderful book on the Schickel motorcycles and showing all sorts of photographs, interior shots of the production of it, just patent drawings, all sorts of things. Just incredible.
If I were to go down 55 Garden Street today, what would I find?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know. Certainly it's gone.
Yeah.
Certainly it's gone. There have been tremendous changes within the past 5 years in the South End.
Oh, sure.
It is completely changed in every essence of the word. But there was this firm that made motorcycles, and eventually it did close, and Mr. Schickel went back to teaching engineering at Cornell.
Interesting. Now,
Here's one
1914, moving to the next slide. And
Here's
this is a, yeah, I'm going to say, here's Siegfried. This is interesting. And this is a very genteel couple out for a ride in the Big Six with the sidecar.
There you go. And here it's here's a Stamford product being used, being enjoyed. And again, this came out of this book that we had no idea, which is what makes the studies of this so interesting. People say, well, you know, what do you do? What do you people do there? We don't hear too much about you. We don't hear as much as we hear Jews. Well, it's very interesting. Sometimes, you know, you get the usual routine questions and people coming in, searching their families and so on, which is, of course, very interesting and very important. I think every family should do something about that. But now and then something comes to our attention that just astounds us. And this book was a revelation. It really was. Into Stamford's industrial history that just, we had virtually nothing, and from nothing to a wealth, an absolute wealth of information on this one firm in the South End of Stamford.
And it's just really a find, because what did we really know about them? So we'll move
very
on
little,
to
very little.
slide 18, and I think a name familiar to a lot of us, Schick Razor. And I think it's funny, we had on Bob Wolf, the legendary sports announcer, on our sports show a number of months back. And he was talking about the Schick, what he referred to as the Schick, and Bob's in his 90s, he was talking about the Schick Safety Razor Company. And I never heard it referred to that way, and he had used it in the context of the 1947 World Series when Red Barber was announcing the game that the Brooklyn Dodgers won on the last pitch, where they lost the game and lost a no-hitter, because Red Barber kept saying Bill Bevins has a no-hitter going. Until Cookie Lavagetto got up and spoiled the no-hitter and won the game. So the Schick Safety Razor Company, as he put it, became incredibly angry at what Red Barber and wanted him on the air. And I said, the Schick Safety Razor Company. I've always heard of Schick Razor Company. So, you know, please elaborate here.
That's a different firm.
Ah, interesting.
That's a different firm. Schick Safety Razor Company was a shaving instrument that you would shave yourself using. You would lather up your face, and you would take this razor and you would just, you know, shave yourself as using lather or soap
Which
on
was
your face.
which was a
Use it.
novel concept at the time, I guess.
Yes, but it had nothing to do with the Schick electric shaver
Ah,
company. Different firm.
aren't you glad you tuned into that?
There you go.
Tell me.
There you go. There was a man named Jacob Schick, and Jacob Schick had this idea for a practical electric shaver. There were many others who tried to make them, and the results were not particularly satisfactory for a number of reasons. But Jacob Schick's concept and patents on them worked. It worked very well, and it was quite successful. And again, the need for very skilled machinists and tool and die makers and all sorts of metalworking mechanics to produce these highly specialized instruments.
Now, where are we here? 1930s, perhaps?
They started in the 20s, and this one is probably from the late 30s, possibly just before World War II, maybe even 40, 41. But by then, of course, they became quite successful and quite a large market. And again, a lot of work and for individuals. And again, there was such a, as everyone can see by now, that there is such a diversity of products. I mean, we're dealing with everything from locks to pianos to typewriters to,
all in Stamford.
all in one concentrated area of
Stamford.
That the South End. And again, why did Schick come to Stamford? We don't know. He never published in memoirs, but we assume because he knew there would be a labor pool.
He saw the resources
To draw on for his company to grow, and it did.
Now I guess we're getting our slide number 19. I guess we're getting to perhaps, and this is the universal stamping. I don't know if that's on your or on our list. Well, put it this way: we'll go to the next one and we'll see what's there. And I'll just
Yeah, universal stamping. There should be one before that.
Okay, one before that. And let's just see here. 18 was, okay, we've gone from Schick at 18.
Right.
And then we go to...
If we can go to these two.
Oh, 19 Edgewood Avenue?
Right. The Edgewood Arsenal.
Arsenal.
Right.
Okay, and...
The Edgewood Arsenal...
I don't want to mess with those guys.
No, not at all. The Edgewood Arsenal is a generic term. The Edgewood Arsenal, and we're stepping back a little bit off of the
industry side of things?
No, this is an industry.
This is certainly industry.
Oh, it's definitely industry. We're stepping a little bit out of the bounds of the South End. This was in the waterside section, across the water from the South End.
Right.
But the implications of what could have happened if disaster struck, thank goodness it never did, could be quite deadly. The Edgewood Arsenal, it was a federal arsenal located on Long Island, had many divisions, all called Edgewood Arsenal, up and down the Atlantic seacoast. This particular installation of the Edgewood Arsenal in Stamford, in the waterside section, produced poison gas during World War I. Okay, chlorpicrin and other types of poison gas. Gas warfare was conducted in World War I by all sides,
right,
which led to a total abhorrence of it because of the effects of chemical warfare. What is absolutely, well, how does this affect the South End? Well, it could have. If this was in a not densely, but it was in a highly populated area
no doubt.
of Stamford.
No doubt.
And today, this wouldn't be permitted. They were producing poison gas in a populated area. Okay? But the feeling was there was a war going on, so, okay, but still. I mean, if it was materials, explosives or things like that, that could have been an issue too, but this is poison gas. If there had been a major fire or an explosion, it certainly could have drifted across to the South End. And it could have been terrible, deadly. Fortunately, it never happened.
Amazing.
But still. But they were producing this and then shipping it by water to Long Island. Tons and tons and tons of it.
And what would you say the year of this picture is?
Well, it's during World War I.
This is World War I. Okay, so it's about 100 years ago. Moving to slide number 19, when this is the military staff, I believe, of the Edgewood Arsenal.
And yes, this is the military staff. It was both military and civilian, with close supervision by the military, of course. It was a military installation. And you had, a definite military presence there. not much has ever been studied about it, and I'm hoping that someday somebody could
Could shed some light on what was
shed
taking
some.
place.
Well, I mean, we know what was taking place, what they were producing. They even produced a newsletter, which we have copies of at the Historical Society. It was no secret in the community what they were producing. I mean, it was no secret that they were producing poison gas within the community. But they were here. But the implications across the waters at the south end could have been quite disastrous if something
had happened.
Fortunately, it never did. Thank
We-
goodness.
I imagine here, and this is our slide number 21, this appears to me to be the old Pitney Bowes plant.
That's right. Correct.
From 40 years ago or so.
Correct. There was an earlier slide showing the Universal Stamping Company.
Right.
That was acquired by Arthur H. Pitney and Walter Bowes. There was a Mr. Pitney, there was a Mr. Bowes. Matter of fact, they used to use that in the
In the commercials, right.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Pitney, positively Mr. Bowes.
Yeah.
Very catchy.
Yeah.
It was an old vaudeville routine, which just they resurrected into a catchy commercial. But they made, of course, the postal canceling machines, which became very, very, very popular,
And
employed a vast number of people.
had a monopoly, right, for a number of years?
No, not
Did not.
quite a monopoly. They were always being called to by the various federal authorities against monopolies, but they pointed out that there were other companies in the United States that did produce postal canceling machines. So they were not a monopoly, but they were the most successful in their products. They were, again, very, very well done, high quality. They worked very closely with the U.S. Post Office. The Post Office at first was very apprehensive about allowing this,
Sure.
because you're dealing with money, and you're dealing with vast sums of money, and the whole idea of that was developed was that you acquired a Pitney Bowes postage meter in your office. You didn't own it, you leased it.
You did?
They would never
You did.
sell them, and that was so to protect the postal money, and that is what gave the federal government, the U.S. Post Office, they gave the green light to them to, all right, so long as the postal monies can be secured, and they did it by leasing the machines, not selling the machines. That convinced the Post Office that, okay, they gave them the green light to proceed, and that was the beginning of their success.
Now, the interesting thing, I mean, when you talk of Pitney Bowes now, and you're getting like, you know, Dan's generation, mine, yours, this was really I'm going to use the word cultural pivot point in Stamford. The sports teams, the community involvement, the bowling leagues at night, the industrial leagues. It was a large part of what went on in Stamford, and it's sad in a way because none of that really exists, I would believe, to this, because you really don't have Pitney Bowes. I mean, it may be at a smaller scale. You're, of course, more recent than I. But,
Am I?
well, I mean, as far as living in Stamford. Well,
I'm 73. Thank you. I'm flattered.
but I guess a large part of culture in
Yes.
Stamford is no longer there because we don't have this large, functioning, burgeoning plant where people met and married, and they sponsored the Little League and the Babe Ruth League, and
And there was
on.
and there was something else too, and this was under the this was the belief of course their CEO Walter Wheeler Jr.
Mhm.
He had a very, very firm belief in that if you work in a community, that you should contribute something back to that community, whether you were a resident or not. They had, of course, the bulk of their workforce came from Stamford,
Sure.
of course, but there were many people who came from other communities. Wheeler felt that you live in a community that you should contribute towards it regardless. He was a very, very firm believer in the United Way. And one of the United Way recipients, of course, which he was very, very strong in other ways in supporting, was the hospital. His argument was that, okay, well, you don't want to contribute to United Way, but yet if you're involved in an automobile accident, where are they going to take you? They're going to take you to that hospital. And aren't you going to be glad that there is that hospital to perhaps save your life? Okay? And he was right.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this definite commitment towards the community, which just permeated the entire workforce. And it was a very, very interesting thought by the CEO of a large American Fortune 500 corporation.
And a time I think we'll never see again. Believe it or not, we're moving to our last slide, which is, this looks like labor unrest to me.
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
For
I recognize Atlantic Street. I recognize the Soldiers and Sailors World War II monument. I
Yep.
recognize the stores and the old Main Street.
very good,
And I
Very good.
recognize people protesting.
very good. What happened to all this industry? What happened?
Right.
No one has written a history about that yet. I hope someday that we are fortunate to have a scholar who will address the rise and fall of industry as the economic mainstay of Stamford, Connecticut. What you're looking at here was the beginning of the end of it. During World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to work out a gentleman's agreement with all the labor unions not to strike during the war.
The duration. Right.
Right. That as long as it lasts, there was to be no strike. There were a few every now and then who would try, but for the most part, for the large, significant majority of them, they kept a lid on it.
Mm-hmm.
They kept a lid on it no matter what, because after all, there's a war going on.
All hands on deck.
That was the saying. Don't you know there's a war going on,
Mhm.
kind of thing. Okay. Once World War II ended, all hell broke loose in the United States with labor unrest, and I think the largest one was the coal miners' strike. And it was one of the first things that Harry S. Truman, one of them, he had many things on his plate, including the atomic bomb. But after the war, Truman had to deal with great labor unrest in the United States. It was all pent up, and the war was over, and then the war was over. Okay, let's consider what are these issues. And the coal miners struck, and there was a large confrontation between Truman and John L. Lewis of the coal miners' workers of America. And this, of course, trickled down into many other unions throughout the United States. And in Stamford,
Which really was a union town.
Oh, definitely. The largest employer, the Yale and Town Manufacturing Company. The war was over. All the various pent-up frustrations,
Started coming
issues came to the forefront, and there was a large protest
Right.
prior to the strike, just prior to the strike of the Yale and Town Manufacturing Company in Atlantic Square. This is the heart of downtown Stamford.
In our remaining minute, and believe me, this time always flies, And honestly, I think we need to have you back again to talk about the future. We've just done the past. I'm not going to ask you that question because there's so much here in the past that we have to get into in the future. And where does all of this take us today? And I'd love to have you back between now and the end of the year to, you know, if you're so willing and able to come. But we still have to do the sports, not have to, but we want to do the sports exhibit. And this is like it feeds off of its own energy. Tony D'Angelo and Ron Marcus here on Connecticut Morning, thanks so much.
Oh,
thanks
great
for
being
the
back.
great effort. Thank you for coming. And Dan Burke will be jumping into the batter's box here. We're going to talk about the sports exhibit. And not only do we have industry in Stamford, we have sports, and we have some great people as well, some of which are in the room today, some of us watching. Right back after this.